It is important to look closely in order to see more fractures. Hello and welcome to this week's Urgent Bite, brought to you by the Royal New Zealand College of Urgent Care. My name is Guy Melrose, and today we take a quick look at an important fracture we should all know about and always be considering in urgent care. In 1966, a paper was published in the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery called Juxtaepiphyseal Fracture of the Terminal Phalanx of the Finger. It describes an injury to a child's fingertip resulting in a mallet-type deformity with the base of the nail superior to the proximal nail fold. Unlike a mallet finger in adults resulting from rupture of the extensor tendon or its attachment, the deformity in these cases is caused by weakness at the junction of the epiphysis and metaphysis, which results in a widened epiphysis and angulation. The author goes on to describe reduction of this fracture by both conservative and surgical measures, and it is a fracture that now bears the author's name: Seymour. The Seymour fracture is an important fracture to identify in urgent care. They usually follow a crush injury to the fingertip, usually from a door, and if there is a decent deformity, then it is obvious both clinically and radiographically. It is much less likely that a mallet deformity in a child is due to a classic extensor rupture, so any deformity should have you suspicious of bony involvement around the epiphysis. To be a Seymour fracture, there must also be a nail bed injury. These might be very obvious, such as when the proximal nail has popped up from under the nail fold and blood is everywhere. But we must be mindful of the subungual hematoma and a small tear of the cuticle being the only sign of nail bed involvement. The management of Seymour fractures is very important to not get wrong. There are a number of complications that can result from poorly treated Seymours, including chronic osteomyelitis, nail dystrophy, and growth disturbance. One of the main issues with these injuries is that the nail bed tissue can become interposed within the fracture, which will prevent the fracture healing unless it is removed. The fracture needs reducing, ensuring that any interposed tissue is removed from the fracture. The nail bed needs appropriate repair and splinting, and as a Seymour fracture is an open fracture, antibiotics are required. This makes this a fracture for which a hand surgeon needs to be consulted, so in my opinion is not something we should be managing in an urgent care. Depending on distance to definitive management, a ring block and reduction could be attempted, and antibiotic cover given early is important, but definitive treatment would then be needed by the hand surgeon as soon as possible. Our role in urgent care is to make sure we do not miss these injuries. The really obviously displaced open fracture is not one I would imagine many would miss, but a subtle disruption to the physis and a subtle nail bed injury might slip under the radar if we're not looking for it. So in a fingertip injury in a child, especially one with subungual hematoma or any subtle nail bed injury, ask yourself each time, is this a Seymour fracture? If there's any doubt, run it past a hand surgeon. Early identification and management makes all the difference in preventing complications. And remember that AP X-rays will often look normal, and it is the lateral which usually tells the story. So always insist on getting the best possible lateral, even if the child is being uncooperative. Now in the show notes I will link to the Orthobullets page and the Radiopaedia page, which are both worth reviewing, and there's also a PubMed link to the original paper from which the Seymour fracture gained its eponym, if any of you fancy tracking it down. Let me know your thoughts and experiences on this injury. I'd be interested if any of you make it your practice to reduce these within your clinics. Let us know via podcast at rnzcuc.org.nz or via the Facebook page. Any feedback we get, we will discuss in a future podcast. Now we'll be back again next week with another podcast. I look forward to seeing you all then, but for now, thanks for listening.